Hello, and welcome to the Northern Kentucky University training series on crisis intervention and trauma-informed care. In this module, we will discuss overview of the definitions of crisis and characteristics of an individual presenting in crisis. A brief description of crisis intervention models will be explored, including useful skills and techniques. Additionally, this section will highlight the needs for knowledge in ethical obligations and multicultural awareness and competencies, an outline of assessment interviewing strategies for crisis intervention, including considerations for mental health, traumatic stress, and substance use misuse. Examine the use of continuity care models for crisis intervention, including interdisciplinary teams and referral sources. This series will review 4 sections on crisis intervention and trauma-informed care. Section 1, Crisis Overview. Section 2, The Crisis Worker. Section 3, Crisis Intervention. And Section 4, Continuity of Care Models. Section 1, Crisis Intervention Overview. In this section, we will review an overview of a crisis, review and understand the definition of a crisis, differentiate the different phases or stages of a crisis, recognize the traits and characteristics of individuals in crisis, and identify and demonstrate intervention strategies to address crisis. What is a crisis? According to Berger, a crisis is a perception of an event or situation as an intolerable difficulty that exceeds the resources and coping mechanisms of the person. A crisis can lead to debilitating effects where there is a significant impairment of functioning and distress. It is imperative for the crisis worker to provide crisis interventions that are timely and direct. An individual may experience an array of symptoms dealing with crisis. There are 4 types of crisis that may occur. Situational crisis. This type of crisis may occur through sudden onset of an event that occurs with little to no warning. Examples may include sudden loss of a loved one, loss of a job, divorce, unplanned pregnancy, rape or sexual assault, and car accidents. Developmental crises. This type of crisis may involve a transition through developmental and life changes across a lifespan. A crisis may occur when the individuals begin to experience a conflict during current life circumstance and begins to have an abnormal response to coping. Examples may include career changes, childbirth, retirement, moving out of the home, or marriage. An existential crisis. This type of crisis may occur when there is an internalized conflict or anxiety reflecting on personal life experiences. During this reflection, the individual may experience a void or feeling of hopelessness, emptiness, dissatisfaction, or unfulfillment. Examples may include examination of career path and trajectory, social relationships and family roles, and the natural aging process. Ecosystemic crisis. This crisis might occur during world-spread events that may affect an individual or groups of people. This crisis may be caused by a range of events, including natural or man-made disasters. Examples may include terroristic attacks, hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, forest fires, or refugee crises. Through a crisis, an individual may move through various stages or phases that may intensify if symptoms go unresolved. As the individual experiences a crisis, their attempt to resolve symptoms of anxiety, fear, shock, or confusion while using the use of coping skills. If the coping skills are ineffective, the symptoms may escalate or worsen, sending an individual into a state of disequilibrium, leading stage where symptoms are no longer manageable and the individual remains in a heightened state of distress and impairment of functioning. Individuals may experience a crisis differently, and there are no clear-cut descriptions of what an individual may look like in a crisis. As a helper, it is important to recognize common symptoms of the individual experiencing a crisis. This may include the examination of emotional, behavioral, and/or cognitive symptoms. It is important to recognize that consideration should be made with individuals who have co-occurring symptoms of mental health diagnoses, substance use or misuse disorders, and/or post-traumatic stress disorders or PTSD. This will be examined further in Section 2 of this module. Section 2, the crisis worker. In this section, we will review characteristics of crisis and trauma-informed workers, recalling the roles and responsibilities of crisis workers, explore and recognize the professional and ethical competencies within the helping profession, including multicultural competence and ethical obligations, multicultural components of crisis intervention, examine the cultural and social factors that may influence crisis, examine ways crisis can be affected by worldviews, values, biases, and assumptions of clients from diverse backgrounds. Ethical and legal responsibilities of a crisis worker. Review the ethical and legal principles of crisis intervention. What does it take to be a crisis and trauma-informed worker? There is no single approach or method to helping. However, there are common characteristics and traits that workers should possess to be effective in crisis intervention and trauma-informed practice. In addition to essential skills and techniques, personal characteristics are useful and may include poise, creativity and flexibility, energy and resiliency, quick mental reflexes, and assertiveness. The role of the crisis worker should work to collaborate with the individual in crisis in order to repair the disequilibrium and return to higher level of functioning. Depending on the degree of impairment, crisis intervention strategies may include short-term or long-term goals. This will all be dependent on individual needs. Crisis interventions are time-sensitive and will require the worker to be active, direct, focused, and hopeful. The crisis worker should be flexible to the needs of the individual and has a responsibility to be culturally responsive and understanding of the ethical and legal obligations. How to become a culturally responsive crisis worker. The crisis worker will be required to work with individuals from culturally diverse backgrounds. It is essential to be open and knowledgeable of various cultural norms and backgrounds. Multicultural components of crisis intervention will include knowledge, awareness, empathy, and skills. Knowledge. It is imperative to become knowledgeable and empathetic to individuals' life experiences and culture. An individual's culture creates and shapes a person's life and can have major influences on how one can view the world. Knowledge and awareness of individual life experiences, history, beliefs, values, and expectations will be helpful toward identifying needs, potential barriers, and development of goals. It is nearly impossible to have knowledge of all unique experiences, attitudes, and beliefs that are different from your own. The crisis worker's willingness to ask questions, listen with an open mind, and consult with others is an excellent start to becoming a culturally competent crisis worker. Awareness. Cultural competence includes awareness of principles, behaviors, attitudes, policies, and structures that can impact every aspect of a person's life. Differences can enrich our society and can consist of gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, nationality, language, socioeconomic status, religion, and political views. Awareness of your own assumptions, biases, values, and expectations are critical when working with individuals. Empathy. The need for understanding and willingness to explore how an individual can construct their worldviews based on morals, values, and life experiences. Effective crisis workers demonstrate empathy through compassion and understanding with full intent of care and concern for one's overall well-being. Skills. Basic helping skills are necessary in crisis intervention. Specific tools and techniques are needed to work with diverse populations. This would include the enhancement of skills that embrace a multicultural perspective. Guidelines and skills for working with culturally diverse populations may include knowledge about diverse cultures and populations, identify and examine the similarities and differences among various groups, including specific needs and barriers, identify and examine the impact of an individual and their scope of forming their worldviews based on life experiences, morals and values, and belief systems. Ethical and legal principles of crisis intervention. Ethical considerations and general knowledge of the respecting laws of the helping profession are necessary to ensure the safety of the client and the professional. It is the worker's responsibility to be knowledgeable of their state, local laws, and professional governing ethical practices. There are 5 moral principles of ethical and decision-making models according to the American Council Association: autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, and fidelity. Again, it is the worker's responsibility to review their governing professional practice and ethical standards of practice. Section 3, Crisis Intervention. In this section, we will review assessment for crisis and trauma care, examine the use of helping skills for engagement of individuals experiencing crisis, demonstrate an understanding of screening and assessments used in crisis, mental health and trauma-informed care, identify strategies for working with clients with symptoms of mental health and trauma, demonstrate an understanding of patterns associated with traumatic stress and crisis, demonstrate an understanding of the assessment and intervention models for suicidality. Assessment for crisis and trauma care. Crisis is time-sensitive and goal-oriented. Most acute crisis situations may persist and change, for better or worse. The severity of the crisis is assessed from the client perspective, and the crisis worker must be objective, direct, and assertive. There are considerable resources and strategies available to effectively address crisis situations. It would be difficult to outline intervention models and techniques used across all disciplines. Therefore, this module will provide an overview of helpful strategies and key points that are useful to help an individual in crisis. The following model provides a structured outline to assist the worker through a crisis. Cannell's 2019 ABC Model of Crisis Intervention. A. Following the client, building rapport. B. Identify the problem. C. Coping. Crisis interventions require adaptability and problem solving. The structure itself is not necessarily a linear process, but requires the crisis worker to utilize many of its components for an effective implementation. Let's review a client coming in for crisis. The client is a female age 25, referred to a behavioral health center, and has recently ended a relationship. The client has expressed currently experiencing the following symptoms: difficulty with eating and sleeping, inability to cope normally, crying frequently, avoidant of friends and some family, difficulty with going to work, and has recently started drinking more to help cope with the recent loss of the relationship. In the first stage of the ABC model of crisis intervention, the worker should begin to build rapport. This will include the worker establishing a working, collaborative relationship with the individual experiencing a crisis. This can be utilized through basic attending skills, including attentive listening, paraphrasing, open-ended questions, reflection, clarifying, and summarization. During the rapport building stage, it is important to convey understanding and respect during the interview process. 5 evidence-based principles can be used to help understand the role of the crisis. This can include the promotion of safety, calming, promote the sense of self and collective efficacy, promote connectedness, and to promote hope. Furthermore, an emphasis on non-judgmental attitude, poise, neutrality, presence of being in control are useful to establishing rapport in a working relationship. Watch the following video below as the crisis worker demonstrates the use of attending skills through the assessment and interviewing process. Recall the characteristics from Section 1 of the individual in crisis. Take notes of the presence of any behavioral, cognitive, and/or emotional symptoms of crisis.
So, what brings you in today?
I'm having trouble sleeping.
Okay, is there any reason why you think that may be?
No, just lack of energy. I just feel numb. I can't fall off. I can't fall asleep.
All right, well, there are a couple reasons why that may happen. Are you eating well? Any problems with your personal or professional life?
No, not really. I just have a loss of appetite. Sorry, I've been doing that a bit lately.
It's okay.
About a month or 2 ago, I had a relationship end. It was harder than I thought it would be. And he can be angry. Now I can't eat, can't drink. Well, that's not entirely true.
Does the drinking help?
Kind of. Everything's hard. I don't want to see my family or friends. I feel numb. I can't focus on work. Just, I don't know.
Okay, let's start there.
Identifying the problem. The main objective of a crisis assessment interview should be an appraisal of the individual presenting in crisis. The assessment interview conducted by the crisis worker should also occur during the rapport building process. The crisis model is not typically conducted in a linear fashion and will require attending to the client needs while also conducting the crisis interview. Identifying the nature of the crisis would require identifying the precipitating event, exploring the perception and meaning of the event, identifying emotional distress, and exploring any impairments of functioning. The worker should identify the precipitating event, explore the perception and meaning of the event, and identify the emotional distress and impairments in functioning. During the crisis assessment interview, it is essential to include any screenings for lethality and any obligatory ethical checks. Crisis workers should be trained to perform in a rapid, time-sensitive manner in order to properly intervene during any life-threatening crisis. Crisis intervention interviews should include assessments that review any risk for suicide, homicide, and/or abuse, and the presence of any concerns or mental health issues. It is important to understand the common risk factors prevalent in life-threatening or endangering crises that would require an in-depth examination and assessment. Although there is no single variable that can predict the incidence of suicide and/or homicide, each crisis and report of abuse, suicide, and/or homicide should be considered serious and evaluated in a more in-depth assessment interview. Watch the video below as the crisis worker will assess for any concerns of safety, including presence of risk of abuse from the ex-partner, and will conduct a plan for monitoring. This may require the need to provide additional resources such as emergency contacts and/or legal referrals.
You've mentioned some concerns about recent abuse in your past relationship. Is there any reason to be concerned about your safety now at this time?
No, I don't think so. He hasn't contacted me in a while. I blocked his number and his friends too.
Okay, that's good. But, we should continue to monitor this. We want to make sure there are no new safety concerns that come up. We can take some precautionary steps in the meantime. One thing, you let me know if any changes occur.
Okay.
We have some additional resources that may help if you need them.
Okay, yeah.
Crisis and suicide. Crisis workers should have an understanding of suicide intervention strategies and be aware of the critical need to assess for suicidality. If the individual does not immediately present with suicidal ideation, an assessment should be still conducted. Individuals who are experiencing suicidal thinking during a crisis may or may not tell the crisis worker about their intent directly. It is important to ask the client directly their intent to harm themselves in order to assess the level of risk for self-harm. The crisis worker should be assertive in identifying the presence of any ideation, plan, and/or means. All threats should be taken seriously and continue ongoing assessments as necessary. Suicide risk assessments will examine the presentation, observations, signs, and symptoms of attempting or completing a suicidal act. The more signs or clues presented means a higher risk factor. Risk factors include high, medium, or low risk for suicide. Examine the risk factors from high, medium, and low risk. Screenings should be used when determining the risk factors. Through evaluation and assessment conducted by a professional mental health provider or physician. Watch the video below and observe the crisis worker further assess for harm and safety. Take note of any reported or observed symptoms of crisis.
You've mentioned a couple times about feeling numb and not wanting to think or feel things. Have you thought about harming yourself? Of ending things?
Yeah. Yes. Sometimes I think it might be better to just sleep, not feel anything.
Watch the video below as the crisis worker will continue to assess the client for intent, plans, or means of suicide. Take note the presentation of symptoms to determine if the client is high, medium, or low level of risk.
To not feel anything. Tell me, do you have a plan?
A what?
A plan of how you're feeling, of ending things?
no. I've thought about it, but I could never. It would kill my mother and brother. It would be devastating for them. I just don't want to feel like this anymore. I want my life back. It just seems so hard.
Okay, good. I'm glad you decided to come here and talk to me about this. And I want you to know that you're not alone. We'll get through this together.
The crisis worker should work to establish rapport, convey understanding, and offer support for the individual. In this current client case, the individual would be considered a low risk. The interventions include close family members or significant others that can take responsibility, monitor, and support the client in crisis. The crisis worker should provide any referrals for ongoing services, develop a safety plan that will also include contacts in the event of emergency, and plan for monitoring. In addition to suicidal screenings and assessment, the screenings of the crisis worker should also include homicide or abuse and neglect as necessary. It is the responsibility of the worker to review any state and local law requirements that report any kind of mandates. Other concerns, including mental health checks, may also include extreme cases and severity of symptoms. It is important to know that the heightened states of disorientation, such as the presence of hallucinations and delusions, may intensify the severity risk for those during a crisis. The crisis worker should identify a network of family members, case managers, and other support systems in the process of stabilizing the individual. Recommendations for outpatient services such as counseling and medication management are necessary for further evaluation and continuity of care. Individuals may require additional treatment during the stabilization period. Referrals for appropriate care and treatment providers are necessary for follow-up services. It is important while conducting a screening or assessment to explore considerations that may impact an individual's level of functioning. This will include identifying any history of or current symptoms of mental health, substance use or misuse, and or instances of traumatic stress. Watch the video below as the crisis worker will assess for any other considerations that may impact the current level of functioning for the client during the crisis.
I want to back up to what you meant about drinking. In my understanding, you've been using alcohol a lot more recently to help deal with the stress, right?
Yes.
All right. Is there any other substances you've been using to help deal with the stress and depression?
Oh, no. Just drinking a little more, that's all. Nothing else.
Sleeping pills? Anything?
No.
Okay. Is the alcohol something you would like some help with?
Maybe. I don't think it's a problem. I just drink enough to feel numb and then try to sleep, not think about anything.
Considerations should be made when working with individuals who have experienced trauma. Crisis workers should be knowledgeable on the impact trauma can have on an individual's physical, psychological, and or emotional sense of self. During the process of rapport building, the crisis worker should provide a sense of hope and establish a collaborative relationship. Recognizing the signs and symptoms of the individual who may have experienced a traumatic event can be useful to provide necessary and effective strategies in managing symptoms. Watch the video below as the crisis worker determines the low level of risk of suicidality. The worker will provide recommendations for evaluation by a behavioral health professional for symptoms of depression and or medication management by the prescriber if needed.
I can make a recommendation for an evaluation. There may be some medication to help with the depression.
No, thank you. I already talked to my doctor, made an appointment to meet and talk about medications and things like that.
Soon?
Yeah.
When the crisis worker has assessed the presentation of symptoms and a basic overview of individual needs, the crisis worker should begin to examine current attempts at coping. The crisis worker should use this opportunity to explore how the client has coped with stressors in the past and examine new or alternative methods for coping. During this collaborative stage, the crisis worker and individual are able to explore and develop methods of coping. Watch the video below as the crisis worker will now suggest working through coping skills and offer resources for substance use.
First, I'm going to give you some information on coping with stress. And then maybe we can look into some additional resources to help with the drinking. Does that interest you?
No, I think I'm okay right now. But let me think about it.
The goal is to identify actions or steps that will help the individual return to a pre-crisis state of functioning. The crisis worker cannot assume the issues will be fully resolved after the crisis intervention and plan for continuous assessment and treatment. Coping strategies should be used to help manage symptoms, but note that not all risk factors and symptoms may be fully eliminated and may require ongoing evidence-based practice, treatment, and referrals. Watch the video below as the crisis worker will explore support systems, coping strategies, and provide recommendations for referrals to provide a comprehensive care plan. Take note of the strategies used for coping and referral recommendations.
You know, this sounds like a difficult situation, and I'm glad you took the step you need to get help. Let's explore ways of getting the help you need and continuing with follow-up care. What support systems do you currently have?
My mom and brother, they're both close. If it's okay, I'd like to continue talking here.
Of course. That sounds great. I enjoyed talking with you, and we can definitely set up some times to follow up. But let's talk about what to do before our next visit. Exercise is a great way of clearing your mind. It doesn't have to be big. Just go outside and take a walk. Also, take some time and spend it with your family and friends. You talk about the people who love you, be with them. But when you're by yourself, spend time with just yourself too. Read, maybe journal. Just getting your thoughts on a paper can be a big help.
Okay, sounds good.
And I want to give you this as well. These are some options for support groups that can help you cope with your past relationship. Their facilities offer all kinds of resources to help with your past abuse. They're safe and confidential. And if you're interested, there's also some support groups to help with the drinking.
I would like that.
Collaboration and an open line of communication will be helpful to ensure the continuity of care. Creating an action plan, being consistent, and follow-up will help to establish long-term goals for crisis management. A comprehensive care model will require addressing the individual's physical, mental, and behavioral health and emotional needs. This may require an interdisciplinary team of providers. Section 4, Continuity of Care. In this section, we will review continuity of care models, understanding the components of the interdisciplinary treatment team and referral sources, and review available resources for crisis intervention. Commitment and follow-up. As previously stated, the risk factors may not be completely eliminated, but can be manageable with the resources and alternative coping strategies. A follow-up plan to commit to coping, continuation of treatment, and follow recommendations of referral sources are the final step for the crisis worker in an attempt to move the individual from current crisis state into a higher level of functioning. Ongoing assessment and safety planning. For any presence of risk for harm to self or others, it is critical to include ongoing assessment and follow-up plans, including safety plans. Referrals for mental health treatment and medication management are also essential through the follow-up stage to ensure a comprehensive care of services are provided. Agencies may have comprehensive teams available under one organization, but may require the crisis worker to reach out to multiple organizations in order to establish services. The interdisciplinary team will then continue to provide services and collaborate care. Outside referral sources are necessary for the individual to receive comprehensive care services during the process of stabilization. Continuity of care and treatment are necessary to improve overall impact on level of functioning. Such referral sources may include medication management and evaluation, counseling services, case management services, and legal referral sources.